You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. The fall conference season has begun, and it's shaping up to be a busy one. Ready, set, go! There are a couple of things on my mind this week. First, how do you explain technical concepts to anyone, whether they're technical or non-technical audiences? And then I got a question from a community member that took me on a path into the Java driver documentation for Neo4j and some entity mapping. Let's start by talking about how we can explain technical concepts to any audience. There are a lot of things all around us that are intangible things. Tech is very much like this. There are certain aspects of tech, sure, that are very hands-on and physical, thinking, hardware components and assembly and maybe some of the Internet of Things and devices and so on. But there are lots of other industries that are in the same boat. So certain aspects of the medical field or art, or how do we teach human empathy and social skills and things like that. I learned some of these things from teaching music, and it's something that I've been able to utilize those skills and apply them to the technology industry as well. One thing I noticed about the technology industry, and this is true in music as well, is that we often use jargon or flowery language that doesn't really mean much to someone who's outside of that space or who hasn't seen that before. It depends heavily on that person's context. Have they had the appropriate background or experiences or education or working in certain industries or in certain businesses or building certain technical stacks and so on in order to understand some of these things? They might not. There's this age-old programming lesson and a little bit of teasing and joking about developers being terrible about naming things. Typically, you'll see this applied to naming variables, the A, B, J, K, I, so on. But this applies really to a lot of other things as well. And I still see this, even though it's kind of joked about, I still see this cropping up in various places. And I'll be the first to admit, when I'm trying to build something quickly or spin up a sample app or something like that, it's very easy to just toss in kind of a placeholder and say, I'll come back and fix it later, and then you don't. But it's really a good thing to keep in mind that no matter what you're doing, but especially when you're trying to showcase this or teach something to someone else or help them learn how to maintain the code that you've written, it's really important to think through some of these things and try to explain them or name them in the first place in ways that are more accessible to broader audiences. I like to keep a general rule of thumb and explain, especially technical concepts, in how they apply to general events or everyday experiences that most people can relate to. For instance, buying something. For hundreds, thousands of years, people have been creating transactions of some sort, right? Whether that's bartering for goods or handing over cash, or now we have digital transactions. That form changes over time, right? And in another decade or two, it might be something totally different. But the base level of transactions, buying and selling goods, is something that people can comprehend and use in some form, right? Another example is maintaining a living quarters. Now, your living quarters may vary. The details and responsibilities that you have depending on your living quarters may be different, but at some base level, all of us have to maintain a personal space. Caring for something or someone, whether that's a pet or a parent or a child or a friend or someone else, neighbor, or even just a plant, right? Most of us at some level understand the concept of caring for others or something living. The last one I like to use is mobility or travel and logistics. Now, all of us have a variety of different capabilities and ways or means to get around, but navigating and moving about the world and our spaces is relatable at some level to everybody. And so trying to appeal to these broader general constructs, I think, is super helpful when you're talking about solutions or business or tech stacks or something specific about a language, right? One thing I try to keep in mind is to know your audience as best as you can. Are you talking to a specific set of developers, Spring developers, JavaScript developers, backend, front end, data scientists, data analysts, journalists, somebody else entirely? What do they probably know? What do they care about? And how is what you have to say useful to them? How can they apply it in their everyday lives or in their technical solutions? The content I want to talk about today is actually a community question I came across, and it forced me to do a little bit of research and digging and learn something new along the way. So the person had asked about mapping their Java application to database entities. They're using the Neo4j Java driver in this case, so they want to be able to map Neo4j nodes and relationships to their Java application entities in their Java application. I found out that the plain Java driver does not map to entity types out of the box. It doesn't provide that capability automatically. So instead, you have the Java driver. It brings back a general record result object, and you have to map that to a movie or person class. There weren't really examples in the manual. I couldn't find a whole lot of information about what to do when you try to map to plain old Java objects or POJOs, as you might hear sometimes, even though I feel that capability is kind of central to Java application building, right? Anytime you build a Java application, most of the time you're going to create domain classes. And then you need to be able to map whatever results to some sort of data you get back from somewhere, right, to some sort of entity. Now, there are solutions to this. In the relational world, you have the object relational mapper libraries. In the same vein, you have the Neo4j object graph mapper library, the OGM library. And you can tack this on as an additional dependency and include that library, and it will help you map those generic objects into your entities in your application. But it is a separate dependency unless you are using some frameworks or libraries like Spring with Spring Data Neo4j. Spring Data Neo4j automatically bundles that object graph mapper OGM library capability into its library. So it is provided out of the box, and you get that mapping framework as long as you use that specific SDN library, Spring Data Neo4j. Some of this can be provided out of the box depending on what you're using, but if you're just building a Java application and just using the plain Java driver out of the box, it does not provide entity mapping. However, it looks like this will be coming to the Java driver in future releases. So keep posted. I will be looking out for that for sure, and testing that out hopefully as soon as I see something on it. So keep posted there. But just so you know, the Java driver does not do that entity mapping out of the box. So you'll either need an object graph mapper library, or you'll deal with generic Java objects, or you will need to use some sort of framework that bundles that OGM automatically. I'm always refreshing my memory on things that I've learned and then learning new things. This episode had a little bit of both. I gave myself a good reminder to try and explain technical concepts in ways that broader audiences can understand. And then I learned something new, that the Neo4j Java driver doesn't include entity mapping out of the box, but that feature should be coming in a future release. As always, thanks for listening and happy coding.